Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karkura Gold, your host in this series where we will reread every single chapter of the Bleach manga, provide critical analysis as well as response to the chapters, and talk about how they connect to the rest of the manga. So if any of that interests you, feel free to jump around the video or watch the whole thing at your leisure, but we will begin with a rereading of Chapter 34, Quincy Archer Hates You. No hollow again? What the heck's going on? How many times has it been this week? Is that stupid pager broken? Strange. It doesn't seem to be. Give me a break. I've got finals right now. So do I. This is your fault. This is all because of your busted pager. I'm telling you, it's not broken. Then what? Is there another Soul Reaper around here who keeps beating the hollows before we can get there? No. Soul Reapers have clearly defined territories, so I don't think that's the case, but... Oh, it was scary! I was really scared, thank you! Then go thank whoever saved you! Hey! Wait, Ichigo! Ooh! You saw something scary? Then there was a hollow here. Tell me, who defeated the hollow and saved you? What kind of person was it? I was scared, so I had my eyes closed, and I didn't really see. Sorry! I don't know what for, but sorry! You can have my magical girl Megalon figure. Please forgive me. Megalon! Alright, let's Konso this. Huh? What's Konso? Are you gonna stab me with that sword? Bleach, Chapter 34. Quincy Archer Hates You. I'm finished! And I'm dead! Smooch the pooch. Well, so did I. Don't worry. One bad score isn't a ticket to Cashier Alley. Well said. Thanks, Ichigo. We morons can wallow in our misery together. We'll be friends for life. Well, you should wait to see the test results before you say that. Huh? What do you mean, Mizuru? Look, this is Ichigo's ranking in the midterms. Dude, only the top 50 get their names on there. Why would Ichigo be on this list? What the? 18th? 18th of our whole class. Does that mean that you're 18th out of all 322 students in our class? Take it easy. No way. How do you get on this list? I'm not in any clubs, so I have nothing to do at night but go straight home and study. Nothing to do? I ask you to hang out with me all the time. Oh, so that's why you've always turned down my invitations? While we were out having fun like idiots, you've been locking yourself in your room learning. You weirdo. Nerd. Ah. Here, take these nerd glasses, Captain Nerdface. No thanks. Wow, you really do study hard, don't you? I guess. Having orange hair makes life hard enough. No matter how many times I tell the older guys it's not dyed, they still want to kick my butt. And the faculty all have their eyes on me, which sucks. I've got a bad temper, so I get in fights easily. If the faculty hassles me, I usually mouth off. Then they say I have a behavior problem, and the whole thing snowballs. I've got a lot going against me, so I try to keep my grades up. The faculty doesn't ride you so hard if you've got good grades. That's why I study. Wow, I guess that would be rough, even for you. Not really. I'm used to it. Just now, the way Ichigo called the teachers the faculty made them sound like institutional torture machines. That's kind of sad. Ichigo must have experienced all kinds of discrimination because of how he looks, things that the rest of us can't imagine. For a moment there, I kind of felt for him. So Ichigo, to you, I give this nerd headband! I don't want that either. So, where's Rukia, Strawberry? Why are you asking me? Well, you're always together. I have no idea. Ever since that TV incident, everybody's been giving us creepy looks. I try to avoid her completely at school. Next thing I knew, there were all sorts of rumors about the nature of our relationship. No way! That sucks. You gotta be kidding. You've got to be kidding. Darn that Kisuke Urahara. He's never around whenever I really need him, but he's always right there when he's not wanted. Call yourself a businessman. Huh. I need to get this soul pager looked at. How am I supposed to know if it's broken or not? Hmm? Ichigo! We need to talk. Hey, let go! Don't you know the rumors flying around about us? No, I don't. It's a hollow. Wine later. Hollow? There really better be one this time. If there isn't, you're gonna witness some serious panty bunching. Yeah, tell it to me while walking. After all that, no hollow again. That's twice today. Relax. Just shut up and jump back into your skin. I've had it with these false alarms. You gotta do something. You think it's my fault? I'm only relaying the order sent to me on my Denrei Shiki. Then fix that piece of junk. Squabbling? How ugly. Good evening, Mr. Kurosaki. Miss Cookie Cheeky. Uh, who are you? What's with the get-up? Playing mad scientist? And how do you know our names? Mr. Kurosaki, you can see spirits, can't you? What? What? No, that's crazy talk. There's a hollow coming. It's true. Right here, there's an order. Which way? That way. You can't even sense it yet? And you call yourself a soul reaper? Whoosh. The order disappeared. Who are you? Uryu Ishida, a Quincy. And I hate Soul Reapers. To be continued in Volume 5. Cone, born on December 30th. 27 centimeters, 182 grams. His head is surprisingly flat when viewed from the side. 100-meter dash in 3.8 seconds. Vertical jump, 13.56 meters. Likes Rukia, Caramel, and Big Bazungas. Dislikes Ichigo, Asparagus, and Onion. Theme song is Kuki Kodan, Tanaka-san, Nichiyo Dance, recorded in U, and Rip Slime, Bushman, recorded in 5. That is it for this chapter and this volume of Bleach. You know, I always felt maybe it was a little strange. So much of this volume focuses on, uh, Don Kanonji, right? And that entire encounter. But it's only really the last chapter. Last 2 chapters, I suppose, but really the last chapter that we get proper introduction to Ishida. So the whole volume being Quincy Archer Hates You is interesting. I mean, like, Rocket Future 7 and Quincy Archer Hates You are great, but you'd think that they would be more centrally located, especially after the previous volume we got right, 3, which was Memories in the Rain, and that was the story that took up the majority of that volume, if not all of it. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. This is like a bit of a change in the way the volume is handled, but still quite welcome. And I think it's handled this way for a lot of reasons, which I will get into throughout the analysis. But I think the biggest thing is, what I brought up before, where all of the events with Don Kanoji really, they don't exist so much to introduce Don Kanoji as this character that's going to be like a major actor within the series. They exist to set up for Quincy Arthur Hates You and this entire like arc with Ishida. Like the whole point is that we get all of the Karakura high school characters together in one place, um, in a kind of organic event, and we get to see, of course, we know now that Ishida was there the entire time. And so the idea is that, this has been kind of all an Ishida arc all along. Like all the Don Kanoji stuff was secretly kind of an Ishida arc, and that Ishida is realizing that there is a Soul Reaper here in his town, and it's a guy that goes to the same school as him, that's in the same class as him, and that Rukia, who's also in the same class, recently enrolled as him. And I say same class. By that I mean they're in the same grade of their high school, right? So I don't think they share a homeroom class together, like Ichigo does with Mizuro and Keigo, but rather that they're in the same grade. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of neat. But let's go into kind of proper analysis and review here. Getting a little bit more into this in depth into the chapter, although I've already kind of launched into it. This chapter is fantastic. I really like this one. I think it serves a lot of really strong purposes, and makes a good use of a lot of its art. So we open up with, again, that power pole. The power pole. I gotta think of a better telephone line. Are power lines, I suppose. I gotta settle on one or the other. I think power lines is probably the more fitting. But anyway, we get that image, which already, as we've come to understand, that's kind of synonymous with there being this supernatural conflict in an urban environment. And sure enough, we roll up on this spirit. I kind of like this design is kind of interesting in that he has like this huge bit missing from him. So it's curious, to think about like spirits like still having like the wounds that maybe were inflicted upon them. And I wonder what happened to this guy. Uh, Maybe he actually got gored by a hollow as a human or something. Anyway, but I like that we open onto this, this moment where there's no hollow, and we've been established that, there's Rukia's, pager is kind of her cell phone where she gets the orders doesn't seem to be working because, of course, as we know, Ishida is just deleting these hollows before Ichigo can even arrive. But at the time, it's like a mystery, so we're wondering what's going on. It builds kind of an effective sort of mystery, and then also I like that they established that it's like been several times this week, so this is something that's been going on. Yeah, it's this sort of only needs a page to set up this entire arc, and does it pretty effectively. Um, they I like that they kind of argue back and forth about this, and the whole time the spirit that's there is getting more and more uncomfortable. But he doesn't actually know any of what happened. Yeah, we can see the bit of his ribs exposed here, so something got him across the back like that. It's kind of curious what that could have been. Anyway, there's a bit of like world building that gets mentioned here that's kind of easy to look over, but the idea that Soul Reapers have clearly defined territories. So, the reason why we haven't run into any other Soul Reapers is that it seems like Rukia might have been assigned to Karakura, right? It's like this district of Tokyo, at the very least, the area in which Ichigo is performing the substitute Soul Reaper duties, basically, right? And so this is kind of an interesting thing to think about because like Rukia is the one that's getting the bonuses for this because she uses them to pay Urahara, right? Because they talk about that, or I don't know that she uses, but they mention that in that exchange with Kisuke. So it's kind of interesting to think about from like that perspective that Soul Society probably doesn't realize that it's not Rukia doing her job, but instead that it's, Ichigo running around and doing all this. Anyway, kind of neat. And then also explains, of course, why there's not been another Shinigami that's shown up. If this is, if it's really supposed to be like, hey, Shinigami, fight these hollows, it's this whole thing. And then, Ichigo's like, well, why haven't I run into one before? The idea that maybe there was only one of them assigned to Karakura, right? And so the chances of running into like one guy in your entire city are pretty low, even for other mortals, much less like a spirit guy that's trying to kind of, maybe even blend in or might not spend all of his time there. So, yeah, I gotta wonder how much of them take up like the sort of work that Rukia does. Maybe it's kind of expected that they hang out in like their district or their territory, and they don't like regularly return back to Soul Society. But it certainly conjures the idea that that might be the case. That they go out in these sort of jobs in the real world. Anyway, neat thing to think about, but very minor here. Just kind of mentioned in passing to sort of give us the idea that maybe it's not a Soul Reaper that's dealing with this, but it could be. You know. Um, Yeah, I like that Ruki is willing to actually talk to the spirit and try to get information, whereas Ichigo is just being pretty dismissive. I think it shows, like, at the very least, like a good bit of difference in the way in which Rukia interacts with, like, like she's still clearly very much the type that knows how to handle all of this a little bit better, right? Um, so her really kind of getting to the heart of the matter and asking the spirit, I think, is pretty smart on her end, where Ichigo's kind of just getting frustrated with the spirit that hasn't seen anything, right? Who's just sort of groveling. Um, we get these kind of panels of them being like this stone face, the darkness cast over them. That got used a little bit earlier as a gag, and I think the previous chapter. I think it's Kubo really playing with the way that he wants to do these gags. Them both punching apart this figurine is kind of funny. Um, it's weird, I think about like, I guess this guy has a spirit version of maybe you could have the actual thing, right? Spirits can interact with physical objects, so maybe I don't need to parse this too much. I was thinking about that the other day. Somebody was like, "Wait, these guys are ghosts, but they bleed blood. What does their blood function if they're ghosts?" It's like, well, it's still blood. They're just spiritual. It's just their spirit blood, like it still has the same functionality as blood does for us. It's just that they're incorporeal otherwise. Um, yeah, the answer is don't overthink it that much. It's still like just assume that everything's got the same sort of qualities. Anyway, um, I like that. Like we get that gag moment, and then we pull out to this dialogue again. Typical Kubo-type sort of transition of showing us a scenery bit and having dialogue over it and using that to transition. But instead of that being bottom of the page to another scene entirely, we get this transition that sweeps us within the page. And I think this is really cool. And that we have, of course, the power lines we pull out to this rooftop, and we get the silhouette of Ishida. Which, between, like, I think, oof, lots of things to say about this. um, Biggest is that I think this is just credit towards Ichigo, what am I saying? Towards Kubo-Tait's design work, right? So, whenever you talk about having effective character designs, you want something that is obviously interesting and kind of tells you a lot about the character at like a glance. But one really big thing in art is having a distinct silhouette for the character. And so, for those of you who are familiar with Ishida Uryu, especially using his glasses there like that, like there's no other character this could be silhouetted, it's very clearly Ishida. He has a very distinct way that he dresses. His hairstyle is incredibly distinct, and the glasses really seal that. And so I think this just speaks towards Kubo's like capabilities as a character designer, if anything. That he designs these very distinctive characters that have very effective silhouettes, but also features beyond that too. So neat stuff. But we've already seen a little bit of Ishida already, so this should kind of even without knowing him intimately, you should be able to connect this as, oh, that's the guy from the previous chapter, right? The guy that recognized Ichigo. And here we get Ichigo and Ishida mirrored like this. I really love this chapter cover. It's like honestly probably one of my favorite ones so far. Um, just in the way that like I don't know, that it's got these really thick lines that I like too, like this kind of really bold line work. It works for me. It's very understated, but really great. Just look. And this is also the first time that we see this symbol on Ichigo's shirt, which will show up again. So I mentioned it here. I'll talk more about spoilers, like the connection that has and other things. But yeah, that is a pretty iconic symbol within Bleach as well. So something to keep your eye on. And interesting that it shows up here. As far as I could tell, this is the first time that it shows up in the entire manga. So kind of neat thing to note. That's sort of something hidden away in these chapter covers. So whenever like I'll have every now and then I'll talk about like one of the chapter art covers like this, and I think that they are significant places where Kubo is playing a lot with character design and kind of showing ways that he can express these characters through different outfits and things like that. But also he does sneak in a lot of little things that I think are meant to be important or significant one way or another. And obviously this details the sort of relationship Ichigo and Ishida might have to each other, right? So far, we've gotten everything basically that Ishida is this character that he hates Soul Reapers, right? Quincy Archer hates you. So he's opposed to Ichigo, or he's opposite to Ichigo in some sort of way. But we also get, there's a few other things about him and his design that kind of speak towards this difference to Ichigo too, and that like he very much is the kind of I'm not going to say ideal Japanese high school student, but I mean, he's getting number one in all of his like test scores, right? So he's like the top of his class. He's tall, or he's like thin. He's got dark hair, all of that, right? Whereas Ichigo's looks really get him called out and paid like discriminated against. Ishida's the kind of person that fits right in. So much so that Ishida has been fitting right in into the background of everything throughout this entire volume, right? So he's kind of been around this whole time, sort of there in the background significantly, but we haven't really noticed him because he doesn't stand out in the ways that Ichigo does. So that's kind of neat too. Anyway, we come back to what was mentioned before, that they have these final exams. So, obviously Keigo's kind of despairing. Mizuru maybe also isn't doing all too well. But, we get this kind of back and forth that really serves to kind of establish, obviously here we don't have any context for Yoshida being at the very top. Honestly, I think they should have put Kunieda above him. If only, like, because having Oryu Ishida at the top immediately kind of signifies, like, there's significance to that name, whereas maybe bearing it under Kunieda's name might have been the more what am I saying here? The less obvious thing to do, I suppose, the way to hide him a little bit more, perhaps. But we know Kunieda; she's the bookish kind of quieter track star girl that is in Ichigo's class, right? She ran after Khan in that previous thing, hangs out with Chizuru back at their place. So kind of interesting, neat character, nevertheless. But it's confirmation that she is also a top scorer, along with Ishida, which of course we don't know Ishida's name yet, so this doesn't really hold significance to us. But the fact that it's here is important. But obviously they roll down Ichigo as 18th, which is pretty insane and something that we might not think about Ichigo, right? Because it's usually it's typical that we have our shonen protagonists are usually not very smart characters, right? Or not very like studious. Sometimes they are. Sometimes the whole point is that they're very, very studious because you want to connect with the sort of audience that's reading manga. You're probably connecting with kids that are more likely to score better on their test, maybe. But you're also more likely to connect with kids that struggle in school too. So it's a gamble, really making your protagonist like this super smart type without really leaning into it, right? Death Note having the kind of like genius main character, though obviously not smart enough to avoid running afoul of the law, but that's neither here nor there. The kind of interesting thing is that Ichigo here is presented as like pretty smart, right? Uh, and before this, we don't really have a lot of basis to think of Ichigo as being like particularly gifted mentally. I mean, we don't see a lot of scenes where we could really take him as being stupid or anything. I don't think he's been kind of lacking in that department, and certainly Kanoji realizes that he has a lot of quick thinking whenever they were in battle. So it's interesting that also applies to his academics, but we get a little bit more there as well as this gets the stat spoken more towards. Um, yeah, I do like that. Like, just artistically, we've got him looking down right towards Ichigo's name here. It's good paneling to kind of draw our eye as well down to that page. Um, I love that Ichigo says he has nothing to do but go straight home and study, which is a lie. Obviously, he's covering for the fact that he spends a lot of his evenings doing his work as a Soul Reaper, right? Or training even. So, the idea is like, oh yeah, well I was just studying, is is maybe a way to cover for that. So that's as much as Ichigo is definitely studying and trying to do better in academics, it's not just the studying, and he clearly has maybe something going on there too. Um, it's interesting to think about. I mean, like, so whenever I talk about this sort of the trend typically for shonen protagonists is that they're usually not that smart unless they're like real genius tier. Just thinking about the ones that are contemporary to Bleach, talking about the other big three, we have Naruto, who is kind of an idiot, right? He's more of like a slacker or like act out sort of student, right? He doesn't really apply himself. Is the whole thing, right? That maybe he could be better if he did. Um, but certainly, he's got capability, even if he's not some genius. Um, and then and that's to really hold him in contrast to characters like Sasuke, right? And then if you look over to One Piece, I mean, the Luffy's whole shtick is that he's kind of like a baby man. Um, he is he's not very smart or wise even. And a lot of his journey is maybe gaining that wisdom, but yeah, I don't think he's ever particularly portrayed as being anything but kind of stupid. He's stupid in the way that like Goku is, right? And that it's this character that is very kind of isolated, I suppose. Like they don't know any better because they haven't lived a life where they've been exposed to like anything else, right? Like any sort of institutionalized teaching or anything like that. Uh, and for Goku, that works to really juxtapose him against Bulma, which I mean that's my probably my favorite aspect of Dragon Ball, especially is the idea that you have this kind of this kid who's really capable in a fight, but doesn't know anything about the world and is really gullible and all of that. And then you have this woman who's street savvy and smart, like literally a genius, but she can't do anything in a fight, and they need to rely on each other in order to search out these Dragon Balls and go on this adventure. Um, I think that's a really cool combination. Doesn't work so well for me in One Piece, where Luffy's just kind of dumb, and it's like, oh well, like I don't feel like there's something to really balance that so much. But usually it's kind of like the idea is that you're trying to present a character that's a little bit more genuine, right? That they're earnest, if stupid. But yeah, it's neat to get that Ichigo's this character that actually kind of applies himself. He's not the smartest person, but he's above, like, in the upper percentile, which is kind of great. Um, but I like that they express that that's a lot of that is because of his circumstance here, which, I think this is pretty good. We get again that sort of black on white framing with like light, well, light not really coming in, but I love the background work for this panel is, I think, really good. And again, indicative of the sort of work that Kubo does with a lot of his backgrounds whenever he does have something that's kind of understated but still evocative and neat. But this really gives us, like the windows of the school feeling almost like prison bars, right? This whole institution that Ichigo is sort of put up against. And that, he's given a really hard time for his looks. He gets in a lot of fights. And, like, yeah, a little bit of that is on him. Like, he easily gets into fights. He doesn't really, like, handle authority kind of coming down on him very well. So typically he responds kind of, mouths off to them, right? Um, and so they insist on this whole behavior problem thing, and then it just creates more and more issues. I think that really kind of gets more to the heart of Ichigo. Whenever I say, like, a lot of his stuff is this individual versus society, right? That he as an individual, he's not warring against, like, the society that he's in for, like, some huge personal, thing initially. It's just that, like, he is being held to a standard that he doesn't feel really is fair, right? And he's the type of person who would rather fight for himself rather than give in. So while, like, we have this whole thing where older guys are telling him that he's not died and they want to kick his butt and all of that, the idea is, like, Ichigo could probably avoid that if he was willing to adhere to these social norms. If he was willing to kind of just dye his hair and keep his head down and, not really engage in a lot of that, like, but he doesn't. He insists upon himself. He's naturally this way. He has orange hair. He doesn't look like most people. And whenever other people are like, "Hey, you should act like everyone else. You should fall in line," and he's just like, "Fuck you," right? So it's very much an insistence upon one's identity. And as we've come to learn, identity is really important within the manga of Bleach. People's identity is entirely tied up in a lot of what's being played with here, like with the hollows being that you have this loss of your identity, right? That all that remains is this sort of primal urges that you have. Um, and so, you're kind of cleansed by these soul reapers, but there's this whole thing of, not finding out the Hollow's identity because the identities could help they could compromise you, so on and so forth. There's a lot there. So identity is really important. Ichigo having this strong sense of identity is incredibly important. Not just towards building him as a character and as a character that's maybe one that we admire or relate to, but also in really establishing him as the centerpiece for this manga, that this insistence upon one's identity is what's important within Bleach. And for Ichigo, his identity is really tied up into these connections that he has to other people and preserving those connections. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that, he establishes all of this, and, he says all of these sort of issues that he has with authority and with these sort of societal pressures and the way that people try to press that upon him. And so one way that he does try to kind of focus on smoothing all of that out is to keep his grades up, which is kind of interesting. So it's like that's like one of his ways of fighting back. It's like, well, yeah, I apply myself, I study. It's less that he's particularly studious or, really wants to get good grades, and more that he gets to avoid that sort of conflict by, directly kind of maybe appeasing at least this sort of thing that works for him. So he finds his own sort of way to navigate this. and Keigo has like a real moment. Of course, we get Ichigo looking away as we have this sort of emotional, like, oh, that must be rough, and Ichigo's like, I'm used to it. And Keigo especially kind of realizes that like insisting on teachers as like faculty makes them sound like institutional torture machines, right? The idea of again this society, this institution that really is trying to grind down these people into being, just another brick in the wall, right? There's that whole idea that school as an institution exists not just to educate you, but to also socialize you, right? To make you a functioning member of this society, but in a lot of ways that can grind away at the different imperfections and edges that give you your identity. So it's kind of a struggle to find oneself, but also exist within a society that doesn't value the self as much. Beyond, obviously we have capitalist culture, we love celebrity, we love these people that, have the strong sense of self. So there's that. But for the average person, most people are going to want to be the type, like, are typically more valued for their capability to sort of fit in and to toe that line and not cause any sort of issues. Of course, Ichigo. We get reminded of Ichigo's nickname, right? Strawberry, which is also Ichigo. But that's a whole Japanese pun deal. Also because his hair is orange, right? So maybe he's called Strawberry for that too. Lots of puns going on there. Anyway, we do get that, like, how these rumors have kind of popped up. I love that, there's the insistence that Rukia hasn't noticed all of the rumors, that she's pretty oblivious to this. But the idea of, Ichigo has really been having to deal with a lot of issues since this incident. And so this is another way in which that we see that, like, that whole thing with Don Kanoji has continued to have these effects on our main characters, right? So it's not just that Ishida, like that obviously the biggest is that Ishida has noticed Ichigo because of this event. But we also get to see, like, this has affected their personal lives in school because people are starting to have all these rumors about the nature of their relationship. Because obviously, yes, Ichigo is spending a lot of time with this transfer student that's new. Of course, Mizuru is one of the ones spreading those rumors. Yeah, we get a little bit more of Kisuke being pretty shady. Never being around whenever you really need him, always being there whenever he's not wanted, poking his nose into trouble. So we get a little bit of a character moment for that, and a little bit of how, like, Rukia sort of knows that about him and maybe holds that against him. And yeah, like, another we get another kind of hollow thing in here. I think this works really well, like, with how frenetic the end of this page ends up being, how much kind of action this is. Ichigo literally being dragged through the hallway, them yelling back and forth, and then that juxtaposed to this whole half page with no dialogue of Ichigo literally being pulled out of the panel as they cross paths with Ishida, right? And we've seen him before. We've seen him in silhouette, and we see him here again. And he lifts his hand, and we see here he's got this little cross, which as we come to find out, that's tied to his bow that he can conjure at the end of this chapter. So here, he's aware of this hollow, and he's going to go deal with it before they can even get there. And of course, here we are yet again, power lines, and this supernatural encounter that they failed to have, right? But here, Ishida finally decides to have a moment of, actual kind of interaction with them, right? He's been avoiding it so far, but now that they're isolated and it's after school, maybe he can finally confront them about this, whatever's on his mind. I love Ichigo kind of swapping back into his body here. you think that they had Khan to kind of handle this issue, but here we are still dragging him around and him hopping back into it. Anyway, yeah. So we get our first look of Ishida, and I think immediately what's supposed to be kind of important about his Quincy getup that he has is that it is all white, right? So it's this very distinct kind of in opposition to the all black of the Soul Reaper outfit. But furthermore, it kind of has this sort of this look to it that really stands it apart. Where the Soul Reaper is very like a traditional sort of Japanese robe, right? The shuhakusho. Uh, Here we have this Quincy outfit that is very much not that. So it stands in juxtaposition both design wise, but also as far as its color goes too, and really establishes this character as being in opposition to Shinigami just stylistically. We get a little bit more, yeah, like a playing mad scientist, right? But like of course Ichigo tries to play off the whole spirit thing, and then immediately Ishida insists upon there being a hollow. We get this shot of his back. We see this kind of 5-pointed cross figure. I say cross. I mean, maybe like a sort of star, right? It aligns with the cross that he has that hangs off of his wrist. Maybe it doesn't. No, this is just a regular cross. I'm thinking of something another symbol, but this is another symbol that seems to be tied to the Quincy regardless. We'll see that going forward. And I really like that he has this point, and then we just see the back of his head, and this panel works really well for him looking over his shoulder. And I love that he calls out Ichigo, right? Because it gives us another sort of challenge towards Ichigo's credibility, where we're always constantly getting moments of Ichigo proving himself and really seeming like he has a handle on the situation, and then other people that are more experienced showing up and kind of challenging how much Ichigo really knows, right? Because he really is this interloper in this other world. So he's constantly being, as much as he's getting reassurance in those moments of victory, he's also having these more and more of these moments that challenge him throughout the series. And I think that works especially earlier on in Bleach. As a structure later on, it starts to be like the sort of thing where it's like, okay, well, how many times can you have another entity that happens to just be more powerful than the last one? Like how much can you continue to escalate things in this way? For Bleach, it ends up feeling more organic than it does in something like Dragon Ball, or well, Dragon Ball Z especially, where like Dragon Ball Z, it's like, okay, we defeated the most powerful entity in the entire universe, this star-conquering guy Frieza, and then it's like, oh well, this guy developed in a lab these androids, and they're more powerful than that. It's like, okay, well, fine, sure, they use DNA from all these people to make Cell and whatever, and he absorbs the android. It's like maybe that's like, oh, sure, but then you follow that up with like, oh, and then we have this magical ancient evil that's awakened, and it's like, okay, that's, I don't know. Like at that point, it feels like a stretch. It feels like you're just conjuring literally villains out of thin air to sort of continue to up the stakes, right? To create a more powerful foe for your now more powerful hero to have an uphill battle against. But Bleach, I think at the very least, it feels a little bit more organic, and I'd say even all the way through, but especially early on because we really have the sense that Ichigo doesn't know everything. Obviously, he's still learning a lot, and so these moments where like, yeah, you can't even sense the hollow, you can call yourself a Soul Reaper, effective, right? Because they remind us that Ichigo isn't the top dog, right? That he still has a long way to go, and he's being called out and challenged for that. We get, you know, I love that like there's this clear, like obvious, like drawing to his arm. It's all stretched. We get the hand, and then that ends up becoming a real important part of his design. Is that cross sparks with energy. The energy flares out of it, and he pulls back on the circle of that cross, which seems like it like can be pulled back on because it is a like a ring that's attached rather than the whole thing, kind of like a key ring almost. And then that becomes the drawstring for this energy bow, which is pretty cool. I do like it quite a lot. It also stands in juxtaposition to the Shinigami, right? So we have these Shinigami that have these swords, right? We saw Ruki has a sword, Ichigo has a sword. They have these swords. It's this very physical, concrete manifestation of their Ryatsu, their spiritual power. Whereas Quincy, they at the very least seem to manifest their energy in this much more, primal sort of way. Like it is just pure energy pulled out and then used. So that's kind of neat that there is that difference there. Of course, great kind of iconic panel here as Ishida readies his bow and then fires it. I love that this pulls all the way across the page like that. It is pretty cool. And then we get this jagged shot down and across over this hollow, and I love this hollow just getting absolutely blown to bits by it. And of course, the confirmation that this is what has been happening all along. These hollows have been getting destroyed because Ichigo has to go and like hoof it on foot to get over to them. Meanwhile, all Ishida needs to do is he can sense where they are and then just shoot an arrow at them from afar. So there's a clear difference in their kind of abilities and the scope of how they can handle these threats. But we get confirmation that yes, this is Uryu Ishida and he is a Quincy and he hates Soul Reapers. So it's kind of neat, really cool introduction to this new character, right? So interesting to think about. Like obviously, this is a guy that attends Ichigo's school, that's been there this entire time, that would have been aware of Ichigo because Ichigo stands out so much, right? But now, recently he probably wouldn't have known Ichigo as a Shinigami had it not been for everything with Don Kanoji. So that's kind of interesting that whole arc really, whenever I talk about like using these structures to different ends, you know, we've been looking at these arcs and usually seeing like arcs that introduce a new character as being, I'm introducing the new character within that arc. The focus is going to be that character kind of becoming a more significant part of the cast moving forward and all of that. And instead of getting that with Don Kanoji, the reality is that all of that helps to just establish Ishida and his connection to Ichigo and how he knows Ichigo as a Soul Reaper. So it's pretty neat, pretty neat. But yes, Ishida Uryu, which is also kind of a cool name. Stands in contrast, I feel, also to Ichigo Kurosaki. So yeah, like his design. I like also just in general. There's a lot to like about his character. But it's a neat reveal to kind of end the volume on, of course, to build hype for what's going to happen next, because we have this clearly very powerful character, human character that has these supernatural powers, which in a lot of ways I think Don Kanoji also helps to establish that there can be humans that develop a supernatural sense and supernatural powers. And so even though Don Kanoji's weren't, anything magnificent, like he has the cannonball, but like compared cannonball to this bow, and it's like, well, yeah, Don Kanoji is nothing compared to this guy, but it's an extrapolation of that, right? Where Don Kanoji really establishes that yes, humans can develop these abilities, and then Ishida immediately answers the well, to what extent question, right? And it's clearly that they can, to the extent of being a threat to Hollows and maybe even Soul Reapers, right? So we're left wondering, why does he hate Soul Reapers? What does he have to prove? What's going on with him? Because this is the first time that we really get introduced to him. Clearly, he has some disdain for Ichigo. He's confronting him like this. He's calling out that Ichigo, calls himself a Soul Reaper, but he can't even sense where the Hollow is going to appear. Things like that, right? So there's there's maybe a little bit of seeing Ichigo as less capable, and that might be there too. That might be a little bit pulled into all of this, but yeah, it's neat to think about, and it's a cool character reveal. In a lot of ways, I think stands in juxtaposition to Don Kanoji's, who's like this really goofy sort of character, uh, who's very performative in a lot of ways, whereas we have this other guy who has been sort of in the background and kind of laying low and isn't super over the top performative. Whenever it comes to dealing with this hollow, he just shoots it from afar, and like that's it for the conflict. So there's this sort of efficiency to Ishida that speaks volumes, and maybe even juxtaposes him against Ichigo in the opposite way that Kanoji does, right? Where Ichigo compared to Kanoji, Ichigo was the more pragmatic and maybe efficient and in the know. But now we have a character that is on the opposite side, right? We have Ishida, who clearly knows more about everything than Ichigo does, and clearly like is even more pragmatic and capable of dealing with hollows than Ichigo is. And yet, what does that mean, right? What is that? How is that going to be significant moving forward, right? Clearly, that gives someone else to define Ichigo against, but what will their interaction spell? And so this leaves us on this very strong note of, he hates Soul Reapers. And Ichigo and Rukia are Soul Reapers, so there's bound to be some conflict there. So yeah, it's neat stuff. I think it's a really, really effective way of introducing this character and using the previous character introduction as a structure to sort of even further juxtapose Ishida, and to make his introduction that much more significant. I think having all the Don Kanoji stuff there to prop Ishida really works in a way that it's really subtle. I think, without me having called attention to it, I don't think a lot of I've talked to a lot of people about Bleach all the time, and usually Don Kanoji gets talking about with some level of derision because he's this comedic goof ass. But hardly ever does it come up, or never does it come up that there's this very clear, like the whole reason for Don Kanoji's existence is to pull all these characters in this one place so that Ishida can then be introduced, right? So that all this other stuff can happen, Rocking Future 7 and forward, right? So their lives can be changed dramatically. And I think to a lot of degree, Don Kanoji's maybe not given that much credit for being a narrative device that gets that done, but I think it's effective in that way. And like I said, I think it's effective in how different he is to Ichigo, and even more so to Ishida. And it really serves to make Ishida stand out in a way that he might not have had we not had all of the Kanoji stuff. So I think this volume really works for an Ishida introduction volume, even though it's totally not what we would have expected going in, right? Because you see Ishida on the cover, you don't expect a majority of the volume to feature this Don Kanoji character. So why is it that Ishida's on the cover? Well, clearly it's the more important thing out of this entire length of chapters is getting to this introduction of Ishida and towards his hatred of Shinigami and the significance of that and how that's going to affect Ichigo and maybe even all of his friends' lives, right? Because that's certainly what Orihime says, is that none of their lives will be the same, thanks to everything that happened. So, yeah, pretty neat. As I said, I love this chapter. I think this chapter does a really great job pacing itself out, building this initial mystery, bringing it back to the classroom, bringing up the whole thing with grades. There's, whenever it's mentioned earlier, you have final exams to do with Rukia. Like, there's so much just that like works to keep this in an effective tempo from going from scene to scene to scene, building upon itself, building this sort of tension, this wonder of what's going on, and then kind of culminating in this reveal of the character and having a lot come together there. I love it. It's great. It's very effective storytelling, and the art is pretty on point throughout too. So that's basically all I had to say about the chapter, which is a lot. Obviously, running on 55 minutes here, so I'll try to keep the rest of this short, but let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about how this connects to the rest of the Bleach manga. So, obviously, we get that this is like, well, like a whole. Obviously, it's the Quincy that's destroying these hollows before they can get to them. That's the whole deal, right? With them splitting off of here and Rukia not knowing what's going on, because of course we know that the Quincy are thought to be eradicated, right? Are all but eradicated. They're thought to be like not even a thing that would cross, Rukia's mind. So, she might maybe be attributing this to Kisuke even. It's curious what Rukia thinks going on, right? Because she says like this whole thing of like, well, Soul Reapers have very clearly defined territories, which is kind of cool. Obviously, we know that, um, and that ends up being the case where, like, I guess Kayan was in this area before, and then, or not Kayan, but Ishin. Ishin was in the area before, and then even moving forward, we have Zenosuke, but I think that's Zenosuke. I think he's the right guy, the weird Afro guy that ends up being in charge of Karakura. But Ginjo being another one before. So it's interesting to think about these kind of Soul Reapers that have been present over Karakura throughout the series. Um, yeah. Yeah, who defeated the Hollow and saved you? What kind of person was it? I think that's really, yeah. Ruki is really trying to get the sense of, really trying to pin down who it was, because she might have her own suspicions. I'm thinking that she might think it might be another Soul Reaper who's coming, to handle her whole situation, maybe. Or it might be Kisuke. I think those are both logical conclusions for her to come to. I don't think that she thinks it's a Quincy, because Quincy are so far, like I said, they seem to be pretty much eradicated, with Ishida really being the last of the Quincy. Little does she know, of course, Ichigo is right there. uh, but yeah, we get Ishida frame there too, which is pretty great. Of course, I was really shocked to see the substitute Shinigami badge here on Ichigo's shirt. Right, the Shinigami is like affiliation symbol, right? Kind of neat, kind of interesting. Of course, it looking sort of like a hollow mask is maybe a whole other thing on its own, but it's cool to get that there, especially whenever we think about Ichigo as juxtaposed to Ishida. So, Ichigo as being this substitute Soul Reaper in opposition to Ishida's Quincy, but as we come to know, of course, Ichigo's a Quincy too. So them being mirrored in this way is also pretty neat. But it's cool to see the badge, like that design, actually show up here initially, and maybe serve to represent Ichigo as having this connection to Soul Reaper, and then that image ends up being used later. Of course, we get Ishida being number one in the class, Ichigo being 18th. Makes sense. Ichigo goes on to be like a professional translator and has a fairly smart kind of job where he'd be able to apply that sort of intellect of his. I like that. I don't know, nice moment. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think of other. Obviously we get Ichigo kind of not handling. Obviously not fitting in, being the odd one out, which as a substitute Soul Reaper, an intruder. Whenever I talk about like, oh yeah, Ichigo's this like real like interloper in the soul, and like as a Shinigami, right? He's really trying to figure things out. He's this new sort of strange entity. That still fits throughout the entire rest of the series, but especially Soul Society arc, right? Where he very much is this invader within this society. And his otherness is what brings a lot of people to accuse him and think him, as perhaps even being the one that murdered Aizen. So neat stuff. That's all kind of set up here. Also, all the rumors about like his connection to Rukia being a thing too. Clearly, that's something kind of happening in Soul Society as well, right? That there's this societal sort of rumors that would come up towards like, why would you give your powers to this human, right? What's your connection to this human? What's the significance of this human? The nature of your relationship. So it's neat that that all ends up being something that kind of gets extrapolated into this larger conflict and is established here. In a lot of ways, the Soul Society stuff ends up being kind of played out within the school kind of institution. And so I think that's pretty smart on Kubo's end, is kind of using these institutions to kind of build on one another and to introduce these sorts of conflicts early, thematically, before we get them, physically played out. Yeah. um, Urahara is showing up whenever he's not wanted. I mean, the funny thing is that Urahara does show up whenever you really need him, right? Like, he saves the day a number of times at the last possible minute. So, I don't know that Rukia has as good a beat on him as she expects, but I think the idea is that whenever she really needs him, right? Whenever she feels like maybe, he's sticking his nose around whenever he's not wanted, but when she needs his help, she doesn't get it quite as much because it's very much on Urahara's terms. Um, do, 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 do. I don't think there's really anything else to mention other than obviously, we get Ishida and his Quincy Cross, we get all of that stuff, but that's all pretty clear cut. Yeah, don't have a lot else to really connect there other than like obviously Ichigo is like throwing like, how do you know our names? It's like, well, yeah, they go to the same school. We knew all that already. Also, kind of interesting is that, of course, Ishida is the son of Ryukin, who runs the hospital that is connected to Ichigo in the Kurosaki Clinic, right? So there's that kind of connection as well, which is kind of interesting to think about too, especially in terms of, we have these two people that are uh, have this different relationship to the dead and in a professional sense, and both of them have children that are on different sides of the thing. And it's interesting to think about because Ichigo is drawn into this whole society thing and is made a Soul Reaper, and just like his father is a Soul Reaper, of course. But kind of neat to think about that Ishida is a Quincy. We usually would think about Quincy being like the ones that are, the minority. Like there's only a few Quincy left, right? So it would make sense maybe if the Quincy were the ones to have the smaller sort of setup, but instead, no, they have this large hospital, and I think maybe that could potentially be like a hint towards Quincy, perhaps even being like a larger sort of organization than we might expect, right? Um, but obviously there were a ton more Quincy in the past, and there are even a ton more Quincy now, but they're all hidden in the Vandenreich or whatever it is, the shadows of Soul Society, literally. So that's kind of interesting to think about too. But yeah, I don't know that there's much else to connect here. Obviously, Ishida goes through a number of design changes. The bows that he uses are different, so it's kind of cool that this one is. Whenever I talk about like materializing these weapons, I like that Ishida having this more sort of jagged, huge energy bow maybe is reflective of him having less control over his power. Because whenever we see Misaki and Ishin with their bows, they have much smaller, much more kind of neatly drawn, tinier crossbows, right? Or like little handheld bows. So I think it's very much like what Ishin says to Grand Fisher, right? Where if it's just a matter of pulling out your power, captains would be swinging around swords as big as buildings, but they intentionally condense their Zanpakuto because it's more effective that way. And I think that's the same probably holds true for Quincy, right? And certainly with Ishida, as he becomes more and more powerful, we get him to have more and more kind of slimmed down and made into distinctive kind of shaped bows, which is kind of cool. Um, Obviously, Ichigo being a Quincy and his Zangatsu being like not an Asahuchi, but really a extension of his Quincy powers is interesting because it's very much this manifestation of his spiritual pressure into a weapon. But instead of him expressing that upon an like a blank blade, it's literally just him manifesting that, which is something that Kubo is actually factually just pulling the wool over our eyes on because it's really easy to overlook. Like, oh yeah, he just has this sword and it just shows up whenever he's in Storyboard. And fucking yeah, that makes sense. Whereas like that's not the case at all. Like they're handed these swords and the imprint, the Zanpakuto is like this invented thing. So yeah, it's interesting to think about like that angle too, and that Ichigo Zangetsu really being this less an actual Zanpakuto and more this manifestation of his Quincy powers. I mean, it certainly has like to a degree, his Soul Reaper stuff tied in there because he's still manifesting. Zengetsu is really white, right? So he's still manifesting white's powers in that way, or actual Zangetsu, not old man Zengetsu. And I'll talk more about that whenever we get there. But it's what the point is here is that clearly we're shown that Quincy manifests their powers out of thin air like this, and Ichigo does the same, but we don't we don't really realize that until it gets really spelled out for us. So it's cool to see it's given so much clear kind of, I don't know, like I say, effort maybe, but it's given very very clear, distinct kind of things here, moments in the manga. But with Ichigo, it's less so. I think that's important and significant. Like I said before, the actual physicality of these weapons is something that Kubo really puts a lot of thought into and is really important to those weapons. It's just something that I'm going to want to pay attention to moving forward. But here, yeah, like the Quincy Cross and the way that it hovers and he pulls back the ring on it and everything. I think that's, it's fantastic stuff. Yeah, as we know, he's literally deleting these hollows, destroying their spirits. And, yeah, I mean, we don't really have a other connection there. That is pretty much everything that I have to say about this chapter. So, thank you so much for sticking around through all of Volume 5, or at least all of this video. In the next video, we will be, or say Volume 5, because I just read it there. I did the same thing with 4 and 3. Ugh. All of Volume 4. Thanks for staying around for all of Volume 4. Or at the very least, this ending of Volume 4. Thanks for watching this video and giving us your time. As always, if there's anything that you notice, please let me know in the comments for this video. If it's something spoilers, make sure to tag it that way. But otherwise, hopefully you enjoyed this one. Hopefully you're enjoying our rereading of the Bleach manga. As always, I am Karakura Gold, and spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.